Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. How you doing? Welcome again to the Behavioral Corner. It's me. I'm hanging on the corner. This is a great life I have, isn't it? What we do here on the Behavioral Corner is talk about everything, because everything affects our behavioral health. It is brought to you with the cooperation of Retreat Behavioral Health. You'll hear more about them a little bit later on. The program, the episode this time on the corner is one of several we are doing over the last couple of weeks about fentanyl. And if you don't know about fentanyl, if you've never heard about fentanyl, you're going to get an education here in these programs, an education that could save people's lives. So if you only listen to one podcast this week, I hope it's this one. Well, the fentanyl has been described by people as the third wave of an opioid crisis that began maybe almost a decade ago. I think we're all aware of that. There have been lots of stories about oxycodone and the deaths and the abuses of that drug. And fentanyl arrives now, as I said, described as a third wave. It's a bit of a misnomer because it seems to imply it has the same kind of dynamic that the first two waves. This is just the third phase of it. While some of that is true, much, much more of that is not the same. Fentanyl is a game changer in a very, very dramatic and terrible way. And we're going to find out about that. Our guests join us again from an organization that we've been working with, the Fentanyl Awareness Coalition, broad-based from Canada to Texas today, and Ohio and New York, all over the place. These are people who have come together, primarily made up of family members who have lost loved ones to fentanyl. And that's what we have for you today. From New Jersey, Ed Kolobis joins us from the Fentanyl Awareness Coalition, and also from Texas, Stephanie Hellstern. Guys, thanks so much for joining us on the corner.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Sorry I took so long doing that. You know how it is. All right, let's start where I began with that description of fentanyl being the kind of third wave of this opioid crisis that we've been having. I know you're here to tell us how it's very much different than the other two waves. So let's begin right there. What is different about this? Ed, you want to start us off? What's different about fentanyl in the context of this crisis?
Yeah, sure. Let me just give you a 30-second brief history. Fentanyl was invented somewhere in the 1950s by a Dr. Jansen. And fentanyl is a tremendous drug. I recently had surgery last September, and they gave me fentanyl before they did the procedure. So you didn't really hear that much about fentanyl. And then right around 2013 or so, things changed. There was an uptick in heroin deaths. And then a few years later, we started to see pills come into the US. And what happened during the previous administration, they slapped China around a little bit. And China sort of agreed, okay, we're not going to send straight fentanyl to the United States. But what they continued to do was send the fentanyl chemical precursor to Mexico. And then the cartels got the bright idea to start mass manufacturing pills in these clandestine labs. And they would stamp them as Percocet, Oxy 30s, Xanax. And one of the problems with fentanyl is because of it's so powerful, they don't have the ability to mix it uniformly. Even a pharmaceutical company would have a tough time making a fentanyl pill exactly with the strength that they wanted to. And what makes fentanyl different than heroin, besides its strength, is this whole issue of deception right now, where these kids are buying pills that are labeled Xanax, Oxys, Percocet, whatever, but they're not. It's straight fentanyl with filler. And what's happening today is what Michael had came up with the phrase "the new paradigm."
Well, Michael Gray, who was the founder,
Right?
founder, yeah.
And for the first time ever, and let's face it, drugs have been around for 100 years. We're seeing first-time users, casual users, and those just self-medicating, dying on a daily basis. Just a couple of years ago, I'm pretty good friends with the mom, Jared Rome, who was an Olympic discus thrower, 6'5", 280 pounds. But over the years, he had a lot of injuries, and he got a Percocet from a friend, and it killed him. Mm-hmm. So, it crosses all walks of life, and that's what's going on today.
All right, let me ask Stephanie this, and you can respond too. Once the drug becomes so ubiquitous that it is now being mixed in counterfeit pills of all varieties, as you guys correctly point out, things change, paradigms shift. We're not talking about your garden variety overdose. You're talking about, and I know you guys use this phrase very pointedly, you talk about people being poisoned.
That's right.
Stephanie, tell me who you lost and what was the circumstances.
Yes, I lost my only son, Kyle. He was only 16. And at that age, who doesn't start experimenting, from 16 to college years. And basically he was given or sold a Percocet, or what he thought was a perk, on the streets. And it wasn't just laced with fentanyl, it was pure fentanyl. So as you know, it's 50 times stronger, more than morphine. And so 2 milligrams kills you. And my son died with 12 in his system, which would kill about 6 people.
Do we have any idea what he thought he was taking instead of Percocet?
Yes. Yeah, he thought he was taking a perk or a Percocet, which, now it's going on 2 years this July 14th of 2020 during COVID, when I lost him, and everybody's going through what we were going through, right? It was actually an epidemic with a pandemic that nobody's talking about. Basically what I'm learning is it's not only just the fake prescription, which I have these wristbands that I say, one fake pill can kill. He got a counterfeit pill, was deceived, but they're also putting it in gummy bears, and they're also making fake Adderall. They're making fake, like he said, OxyContin, fake Tylenol 3 as well. So people are being deceived, thinking they're taking one thing for, to just get a little bit of a pain high, and they're being deceived. And so that's why we are saying, my son was poisoned. My son did not have an overdose. An overdose is when you've taken too much of something. And
yes. Yeah. Ed, your situation is very similar, right?
Yeah, a similar situation. I have to go back to the evening of July 3rd, 2018. We were planning on having people over the next day. And I remember my son pulling up in the car door slamming. He had just graduated from electrician school. He worked 5 nights a week in a restaurant. He was in the gym every day. Just this great, solid kid. And I remember thinking to myself as I, looked out the window, I thought, wow, that's my son. How proud I was of him. And he walked into the house, and we talked for a minute, and that was the last time I saw him alive. I found him the next morning face down on the bedroom floor. He never made it out of the house that night. And it wasn't long after that I found out that he thought he was taking a Xanax pill. And there were no Xanax. It was just straight fentanyl. And so at the time, you're in a state of shock. But I thought, well, I have to do something about this. So I wrote something to the local news outlet. And then it was just a few days later, I got a call from Michael Gray. And, we went back and forth. He had just lost his beautiful daughter, Amanda, just a few months earlier. And we both decided we needed to do something about it. And that's sort of how the Fentanyl Awareness Coalition started. About 6 months later, we went down to Washington, D.C. We actually had a 2-hour meeting with the then drug czar, Jim Carroll. Since then, we've been down to DC on multiple occasions. So the last time was in January, and we both spoke in front of a congressional committee. So, and, since then, we have Stephanie and Marlise, and, simply speaking, for us now, it's all about saving lives and spreading that message that one pill can kill.
Yeah. Stephanie, let me ask you, and I'll ask you as well, Ed. Again, neither of you had, I'm taking it, any indication that your kids were seriously abusing drugs prior to their death. Yes, you're right, Stephanie. Kids do crazy stuff. We all did. We all take what we thought we were doing were kind of acceptable risks. This was different. But again, you didn't know about fentanyl prior to your Kyle dying, right?
No.
Right. Who told you? So who told you? Did the authorities say to you when you're going, no, it couldn't possibly be a drug overdose. My kid wasn't abusing drugs.
Right.
The police tell you what's going on? Is that how it happened?
No. So it's a really interesting story is, and I'll go back a little bit too, is, I'm getting back, it's tax season, it's 2 days, and I get home, I can't find him anywhere. And I ended up finding him in my backyard on the patio. So I tried to resuscitate him, and it was the hottest day of the summer here in Texas. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe he had a heat stroke or, or maybe an underlying condition that I didn't know about. It took 4 months for me to get that autopsy. And so, can you imagine you lose your child and then you're at the same time COVID's going on and you're still over here and you're calling the detective trying to figure out what's going on. And he's like, wait, we're just waiting for the autopsy. We're waiting for autopsy. And normally it takes about 90 days is what I'm hearing. But during COVID, it took an extra month. And the detective didn't even have the decency to still call me and tell me what happened. Somebody saw it online from a friend that was curious and was trying to figure out also what happened to Kyle. And they called me like, hey, have you gotten the results? I'm like, no. And I looked online and I saw the words acute fentanyl intoxication. I'm in marketing. I've got my master's in counseling. I immediately looked to see what that was. I had never heard of the word fentanyl. And once I started Googling and just researching and finding articles and everything else, what I was learning is there's two kinds. There's the legal kind that Ed talked about that he was even prescribed. It's even in an epidural. My best friend just had a baby and I was like, she almost freaked out, like, what? And I'm like, it's okay. There's a doctor here, And then there's the illegal that we're talking about of how all these people are being poisoned so I just did a lot of research, and that's how I came across. I ran into Ed and Michael and all of them. I'm so glad I did at that time because I had just lost Kyle. I had started doing research. I even looked up and I'm like, what do I do as a counselor myself? I talk about support groups, right? So I was on Facebook, social media, looking up other people, and I realized I was not alone. And so I just kept researching, and I'm so glad I found other people. It's unfortunate that they've been on this journey longer, but they were able to take me right under their wing and say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we have done. This is where we're going.
What's interesting, Ed, about Stephanie's story, and I've heard it many times, is that it reveals what you guys are talking about at a paradigm shift. A young man, otherwise healthy, is found, dead in the backyard, or in your case, in the house. The police, because of the context in which it's occurring, this isn't somebody that bought drugs on the corner and died in a shooting gallery in a bad part of town. He's at his home, and they don't see it as associated with drugs. So they seem to be in as much of the dark as you were. The idea that it took you, Stephanie, 4 months to find out that a drug, an illegal, deadly drug, killed your son is astonishing. Ed, were you similarly initially confused as to what happened?
I don't know if confused is the word. I wasn't thinking right at the time. I was definitely in a state of shock. In my case, there was some, and everything is a blur now. Because when I approached my son and saw him face down, I remember the first few words out of my mouth were, why? And I had touched him and he was ice cold. His fingers were purple. His face was distorted. And from what then the police were there within a matter of minutes. And from what I understand, there were some traces on, I don't know, I think it was a half a pill on a tray.
So they had a little more evidence of what happened.
It just so happened that the first cop that showed up was friends with my son. Eddie was 20 years old. This guy was in his early 30s. And there's a lab 30 minutes away. And he said, I'll let you know in a couple of days. And it was 3 days later he called me up.
Yeah.
Straight back.
It does though bring into sharp relief what these shows were doing and what your group is all about, the Fentanyl Awareness Coalition. And that is to not in any way to minimize the problems of substance abuse disorder or the need people have, many people, for treatment for SUD. Mm-hmm. But it's to pause the discussion, the old standard narrative, and say, yes, that's true, and that work needs to be done. But there's a much bigger thing going on now. And the reason we all should hear it is that we're all stakeholders. Mm-hmm. Everybody is at risk. If this, and the irony again, and I would like to hear you comment on this, is that this sudden uptick, this exponential increase in deaths because of this poison occurs when a airborne communicable disease is sweeping the globe and we're all in a flat out panic to protect ourselves against COVID. We're still stuck somewhere where people go, okay, fentanyl's bad, but it happens to those people.
Yes, those people. Yeah.
Right.
Not my child.
So that is the message here. Well, you tell me the message is here. No, it doesn't happen to those people.
No, it's actually hitting everybody. I'm glad it finally came out that the number one cause of deaths now, the number one is fentanyl. It's more than car accidents, more than COVID, more than gun violence, and suicide right now. So to me, that's very alarming. It's ages 18 to 45. And what we're seeing too is it's the people who are getting targeted as well, that it's very normalized for, just what do you do when you have a cold? You take a pill or you take medicine, right? When you have a headache, you take a pill, right? Now they're even pushing the COVID pill, So it's very normalized for pills all the time, right? Even for ADHD medicine, all these other things. So our kids are being very desensitized to everything that's going around. So right now who's being targeted is around 13 to 24, where we're seeing those people dying right now. And it's early as I'm now telling people, you need to talk to your kids as early as 6 or 7, because there was an 8 or 9-year-old in elementary that almost OD'd from gummy bears that were at school that someone brought. So that's just very alarming that everybody and anybody needs to know that, hey, talk to your kids, talk to your loved ones. And if it's something that is not sealed, packaged, you got from the pharmacy, do not take it at all. Do not take it at all.
Yeah, Ed, we talked about this just before we went on the air, and ironically, we're at a point in time where that old standby 30 years ago now of just say no, which was pretty roundly ridiculed as being ineffective. And it was ineffective in terms of people abusing drugs. We're back there now. We're back at now where you've got to just say no to anything you're not completely and utterly certain about. Let me ask you this, because I don't want to lose track of this. The problem of fentanyl, its origin, its diversion into Mexico, where it's now made into a really deadly concoction, the use of it in counterfeit pills, which spread the danger and the deaths associated, is a problem that's not going to get solved on a local basis. It's too big. It's very complicated. It takes governments working together to solve this problem. So we know that. Here's what I'd like to hear from you two, because I know in addition to raising awareness, that you both speak in front of groups, parents who want to know what they can do. Ed, what are a couple of things beyond telling your kids about the danger that parents should be telling teenagers and doing to raise their awareness?
Well, I think the one thing that you have to tell your kids is that the only time you should ever take a pill is if you actually get it from a pharmacy. Because you can have a friend that has the prescription bottle and say, look what I have. Well, you don't know what was in that bottle before. You don't know where the pills came from. And what we're trying to do right now is launch a national awareness campaign. Everyone knows the Geico commercial. 15 minutes can save you on car insurance. Mm-hmm. What we want to do, which is the equivalent to that, is 15 seconds. 15 seconds where you have that indecision, you can make a choice, and that can save your life. And the choice is to not do that pill. And one other thing I want to touch on, Steve, I know when I was growing up, we're roughly pretty much the same age. You go to a party, there'd be some beer there, pot would be around. Occasionally someone would show up with cocaine, right? Mm-hmm. Today, these kids are living through a pill generation. You can't turn on the TV set with seeing ads from pharmaceutical companies. Pills are a good thing, right? They help people.
Absolutely.
They alleviate pain. And that's what's happening now. These kids go to parties and it's all about the pills now. And Stephanie would agree with me on this. We predict that heroin will be gone within the next 5 years. And I'll tell you why. Think about what it takes for heroin for dealers to deal heroin. You have to grow it. You have to tend to it. You have to cultivate it. You need the right climate. You have to ship it. With pills, it's simple. All you need is the cursor and some 8x10 room and a pill press machine. And they're making them by the millions right now.
It's also easier to detect. It's also easier to interdict. Fentanyl is the perfect drug if you don't care how you make your money and you don't care how many people die as a result of your product. It's diabolical in its efficiency to both make money and kill people. Stephanie, with regard again to talking to kids about this, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it would seem to me that if I were talking to a youngster, and the younger the better, I would take it out of the context that I heard it in when I was growing up, which is this is bad for you and bad people do this and it's all sort of you're not that kind of person. Don't you have to shift that and say, just like you wouldn't step in front of a bus, you can't take these drugs. Do we have to talk to kids like that?
Yes, actually, that's something that I also talk to parents. I think this is, I really believe that everything's happening for a reason. With my background, I'm realizing and talking to these parents and kids, right, that we have to be real. We have to have the hard conversations. If not, they're going to hear it from someone else or they're going to take it from someone else. So I was very transparent with my son. We talked about weed. We talked about all the different things. I'll be very transparent. I knew he was smoking here and there. Not that I condoned it. Mm-hmm. He would with his friends, right? Who doesn't with their buddies and stuff, but I did not know about fentanyl. And so that's one of the things that I tell and I talk to kids is like, hey, do you want that person look to your left? Look to your right. Do you want them making your decision for you? Because if they hand you something, they are going to make that decision if you take it from them. And it could ultimately, I tell them, just like my son, he took it from his best friend and one pill killed him.
Ed, are we seeing it in the marijuana supply, the street marijuana supply yet?
Yeah, there's stories out there now. And I first saw the first fentanyl and marijuana story about a year ago. And it was sort of a little bit sketchy. But since then, there's probably been about a half dozen instances where there's been fentanyl and marijuana, and it's been tested. So somehow or another,
my guess is that. Yeah, my guess is that it's probably more labor extensive and more expensive to lace marijuana with it than to bang out these counterfeit drugs. It's just easier to bang out drugs. The other thing, I'd like to hear you both.
To add to that, I was going to say, I just met with my local DA and they were talking about all that. And literally what they're doing instead too is just putting it on the blunt wraps or sprinkling it on it. And basically what's happening is it gives you a different high. So it makes you come back to the dealer. So that way you keep buying from them versus anybody else. Cause you're like, oh, that one was really, dank, or that was really like, so that's how they're doing it, is they want to keep having people come by, but they also don't know which ones are killing off either.
Yeah, Ed, you mentioned the pill culture. You know, we have taken we turned a lot of things into pathologies that might not be, and hyperactivity among kids, fidgety and unable to focus at an early age, has always been with us. And it's not so very long ago that we decided there was a pill for that. So you're right. We have at least one, maybe two generations of young people for whom taking pills is not only ordinary, but prescribed by adults.
That's right. Yep.
So then how, this is the hard part. So then how do young children go, well, wait a minute, you told me I should take this pill.
Yes, exactly.
Now you're telling me I shouldn't take any pill. I don't think you know what you're talking about. How do you crack through that?
Well, you know what? That's interesting. I was going to say that. I think that's what my son was kind of trying to figure out himself. At that age, you're trying to find the meaning of life, right? And so, what do we say? No, don't do drugs. And then he tries weed. And he's like, oh, nothing happened to me, right? And then what I realized is my son had gotten a go-kart accident, and they had given him some pain meds. And I made sure I only, kept the bottle, and I only gave him part of it, And so him thinking that's okay, then later on thinking, oh, this is for my friend, it's okay. And it wasn't.
Ed, you said your kid was your son was active and worked out, and I don't know if you've had this experience. I don't know if you did as well, Stephanie. But I remember when my son played ball in high school, and this is not so very long ago. If you hurt your knee, here's 30 Oxycontin pills. I mean, it was standard procedure to provide these pills. Let me ask you, Ed, we understand where the source of the problem is now. We understand where the drug's coming from. We understand who's benefiting from it. We understand all that. What role do you think the domestic pharmaceutical industry bears some responsibility, even indirectly, because they spent a very long time telling us these drugs were okay, and they weren't. Now they're not only not okay, they're poison. Do they bear some responsibility in this whole crisis?
Well, I guess from an addiction point of view, you're getting back to the whole Sackler thing now, right?
Yes, but not so much the addiction thing. Yeah, they contributed to addiction, but they also contributed to this notion that a pill is safe.
Yeah.
They spent billions of dollars saying a pill is okay, and the bad guys just came along and went, well, we'll make pills and let them figure out whether it's good or not. There's a lot of blame. There's a lot of blame to go around in this thing.
And in a sense, what the Sacklers did with Purdue Pharma was deception, because they kept saying, "Hey, this stuff isn't addictive," when everyone knew it was. The doctors even knew it was.
Incidentally, and this is a kind of perverse, I guess, turnabout is fair play, but I read that the Sackler, Big Pharma, and certainly their company, Mundo Pharma, they have an international branch. When they got in the trouble they got into in this country, they have pivoted now over the past couple of years, and they're targeting Asia and Africa and getting doctors over there to buy into the same stuff about how safe this stuff is and don't worry about it and prescribe it. And it may be a different pill, but they are still contributing to this culture of, well, you just take a pill. Everything will be just fine if you take a pill. I want to bring this back to your group's central premise, which is the paradigm has changed and shifted. And what we are talking about, as I speak to you two and others, are two parents whose children were not only lost to this drug, but were poisoned by it. Ed, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, they absolutely were poisoned by it. Historically, we had used the term drug overdose, and like Stephanie said before, that was typically if someone used too much of a drug. But today, kids try things, and instead of kids learning from their mistakes, they're dying from them.
Yeah, there you go.
My son Steph's son, they didn't even get to the point where they were addicted. They
Right.
died before they had a chance. They died before we had a chance to even help them if they became addicts.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
It sounds more like, sounds a lot like homicide, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Stephanie, last word.
Yes, actually, to talk about homicide stuff, when I mentioned about, the detective didn't call me, and then later when I did call him, like, hey, why didn't you tell me? He's like, well, this really isn't a real homicide. And so it was literally that case was closed and dismissed, like my son was an addict. And so ever since then, I've been like researching, and there is another organization called drug-induced homicide. And basically what I learned here in Texas, and you would think for a Texas state, an eye for an eye here, right? Well, we don't have drug-induced homicide law here. So when I met recently with Governor Abbott, I brought it up. I was like, first, we need to change our perception, which is that mindset. We've been looking at the old paradigm, which is the either homeless person or the addict in the street with a needle. That's the old paradigm. The new paradigm is that it's in these pills, it's fentanyls in everything you can think of, and you need to be careful. So we need to change that mindset. And I said, we're not doing it when we're using the word overdose. So now even in the Texas governors, my own sheriffs and law enforcement are starting to use the word fentanyl poisoning. And I also gave them the paperwork and said, hey, here's someone that has drug-induced homicide in their state. We need to do that here in Texas.
Well, it's reached the level of the mainstream media, perhaps not to the extent you'd like, but the New York Times in May or something had a great article, said it's entitled "Inside Fentanyl's Mounting Death Toll. This is poison." And that's a breakthrough. Hey, thanks so much, guys. If people want to know more about the Fentanyl Awareness Coalition, they can go to your website. Will that tell them if they wanted to start a branch in their neighborhood, how they can do it? Ed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, we're working on that right now. We're going to do a new relaunch of our website, but we'll be offering memberships where someone can become an annual member, as well as, hey, do you want to start a coalition in your area? And that's one of the things I'm doing in Texas. I think all of us are doing in our area. We'll start gathering everybody that's in our area so we can start making changes and be able to talk to, we kind of call it the umbrella effect, where it's FAC here and then all the other organizations that are fighting the same fight. Let's all come together as a unity.
And I want to be clear about this. The organization was began by bereaved family members, but now you're reaching out. You don't have to have lost someone to get involved in this fight.
No, not at all.
No, anyone with a child, anyone.
Right. And anybody, exactly.
Yep.
We're truly all in this together. Ed Kolobis and Stephanie Hellstern, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Obviously sorry for your loss. Anytime we can have you back here on the program, you're welcome for sure.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you guys for your attention. These shows are important, if you'll allow me to characterize them that way. So we hope you're listening. Look for the Behavioral Corner, wherever you find podcasts, and you follow us on Facebook and like us when you like us and subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. Catch you next time, Behavioral Corner. Bye-bye.
Retreat Behavioral Health has proudly been serving the community for over 10 years. Here at Retreat, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 or visit us at www.retreatbehavioralhealth.com to begin your journey today.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.